The Automated Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Automated. I'm Mark Verbenkov, and this, of course, is the podcast exploring the impact of technology on jobs. So last week, almost as soon as I published the episode on 3D printing, I came across another article that actually described some 3D printed organs, which, as I had mentioned, was one of the main challenges of ending the black market organ trade. So I'll talk about it very briefly. So in April of this year, researchers in Tel Aviv, Israel, were able to print a fully vascularized heart that combined human DNA into it. So it apparently completely matches all anatomical properties of a human heart, with just one little catch. It's really, really small, actually the equivalent of the size of a rabbit's heart. So though this small heart would need to be also further developed and trained to pump properly, the 3D printing technology is really not that far off from printing a full-sized heart. So therefore, the illegal organ market might actually be ending sooner than expected. We can only hope. But let's move on with today's theme. So we're going to be looking at automated kiosks, which hopefully most of us have come into contact with by now in one way or another. But actually the touchscreen technology that we're seeing more and more of in grocery stores, restaurants, or airports is really not a new idea. So the first coin-operated vending machine was actually introduced in London as far back as 1883, where it dispensed postcards. But it then quickly grew to giving out things like envelopes as well as newspapers. Today, though, it's pretty unlikely that you go into any kind of transportation hub or station without seeing the modern version in the form of a vending machine, which will be selling some sort of snacks or newspapers rather than having people do this. So on this point, about 10 years ago, I was backpacking across Latin America, and one of the main points of culture shock for me was that at every single bus stop, there were vendors that would be hopping onto the bus to sell their goods to all the passengers pretty much all of the time. So after a few months of traveling, I actually lost count of the number of times that I had bought either some plantain chips or even fresh fruit that these hard-working people would be selling. So though this really isn't the case in most parts of the West, many people around the world still make their living this way. Even famously, in 2010, in Beijing, China, there was actually a 12-day, 100-kilometer-long traffic jam where a small ecosystem developed, and many people were selling all sorts of various basic goods from food to toilet paper to water, you name it. So another predecessor of this modern automated kiosk is the ATM, which had some 3.5 million installed worldwide before starting to drop in use due to the cashless payment systems that most of us use today. Of course, the vending machine, ATM, as well as modern automated kiosk enable access to a good with no human interaction in a fast and efficient way. So additionally, these modern kiosks that we use today also give employees fewer opportunities to steal money, which is actually a really big problem, especially in retail. So for these reasons, it is estimated that the automated kiosk market will actually grow to some $34 billion by 2023. But why don't we look at a couple examples of these automated kiosks to get a better understanding of what they do and where they're actually implemented. So one of the maybe more well-known examples is with McDonald's. And they actually started rolling out kiosks all the way back in 2015. And they actually plan to open about 1,000 kiosks per quarter through 2020. And it was actually only in September of this year that McDonald's acquired a business in order to implement artificial intelligence into its kiosks to improve the recommendations of other products for orders. So the expectation here is that with the recommendations that are much more personalized based on your previous purchasing habits, time of day, even the weather, it will be easier to coax you into ordering more with every single visit that you make to McDonald's. So though initially it will be just implemented in all the US and Australian drive-thrus by the end of 2019, the goal is really to have this in all the store kiosks across the entire world. However, if you've ever used one of these, you'll know that you're still required to complete your purchase using your card for the most part. In China, however, perhaps you've heard that this is done a little bit differently. So Alipay first rolled out its Dragonfly facial recognition system at the end of 2018, and it has since then expanded to over 300 cities in China. This enables a customer to simply look at a screen, input a single account number, and walk out of the store after the attendant has scanned their purchase, with the system linking their face and the purchase to their account. However, this has already been taken a step forward. So Amazon launched their cashierless convenience store in 2018 called the Amazon Go. Perhaps you've heard of it or seen some commercials for it. So today, 18 of these stores are found across a few US states and enable people to walk into their store, and through the use of sensors, computer vision, and a simple pre-installed app, the store will track you, the goods selected, and charge your account without you having to scan each item individually, as you have to do in the automated checkout counters of today. Also, there is no standing in the checkout line waiting for the person in front of you to pay anymore, which, if you're like me, sounds really good. So though this is fully functional in only a few stores right now in the United States, China already has hundreds of these stores, although they are using slightly less advanced technology, like the RFID tag in each of Bingo Box's products. However, this of course enables essentially the same thing to happen. So because we have already quite a number of stores already operating with this technology in China and a couple stores in the United States, I think it's pretty clear that we are seeing a trend towards the automation of retail stores. However, this trend that we're moving towards isn't free of concern. So though the convenience of simply walking into a store, choosing what you want, and walking out without the time-wasting hassle of really waiting in line does sound absolutely amazing, the additional data collected from our purchasing habits by these companies should really be alarming for anybody listening to this. So I think it's a little bit outside of the scope to talk about in this podcast, as it's quite a larger subject, and I might have an entire episode dedicated to this later on. But if you're interested in this topic right now, I'll link in the show notes to a terrific documentary that I was recommended by from a friend that really goes into today's data and privacy concerns and does a really good job of explaining these issues, as well as discussing the current technological competition between both the USA and China. The documentary itself is called The Age of AI, and it can be found on pbs.org, but I'll have a link up in the show notes for you, as I mentioned. So apart from the data collection concerns, I think that the more relevant impact for this podcast is that of the impact on jobs. So one of the first examples that I used in this podcast all the way back in episode 2 was actually of the ATM and how it was seen at the time as the technology that would eliminate all bank tellers. However, as I discussed, the opposite actually occurred, as the savings enabled more bank branches to open, requiring even more bank tellers to operate them. Now, this might very well be the case for the examples of McDonald's and others that use these automated kiosks as a supplemental technology to the stores that are already there. So with the increased efficiency and lower wait times, revenues might be able to increase and more stores can actually open up. However, with the Amazon Go type stores that require literally zero staff, I cannot see this argument applying. Now, this doesn't mean that jobs won't be created. It, of course, takes tremendous amount of work and skills to be able to design and build stores like this so that they function properly. They need to reduce any possible theft, have people charged for exactly what they take and not for something else, as well as properly attach the person to their purchase and not have that purchase attached to somebody else. However, retail jobs such as cashiers have traditionally been the entry-level positions that enable many to have a first working opportunity. For example, my first job was actually working at McDonald's. I was both a cashier and drive-through attendant at different times, and it enabled me to save up enough money to buy my first car, as well as help contribute towards my university admission. And then during university, I had friends as well as family working at different university bookstores that helped pay for their tuition. And of course, get the deals on the ridiculously expensive textbooks that every student dreads buying. So even if these technologies aren't implemented across all possible retail jobs, I think that the reduced opportunity for early entrance to the job market or students to pay for their studies is a real problem that we as a society will really have to discuss. So following along this same argument, perhaps an even more present job for early entrants and students is that of waiting in restaurants, and this is also starting to be threatened. So I remember the very first time I went to Amsterdam right before starting my master's, and when walking around, I kept noticing that these small fast food shops had entire storefronts with nothing but deep fried snack vending machines, where you could simply put a few coins in and a small door would open up and you'd get your snack. And then the staff attendant who was behind these storefronts would then begin to fry up another one for the next person. But this still requires human staff to prepare the food. There are today more advanced examples. So one example in particular is that of Google recently investing in a restaurant called Creator. And this is a burger shop that has the preparation of the burgers completely automated. There are, of course, still staff members, but they're only there to check on the machines, take orders, and then give the finished burger or meal to the customer who had purchased it. However, we know from the previous examples in this podcast that even this can mostly be automated through the implementation of a McDonald's-like kiosk. So another example of this is Cafe X, and this utilizes a modified industrial robot arm that I talked about in one of the previous episodes, as well as an automated kiosk screen. So the robot barista can actually make 2 drinks in just under a minute. And apparently, of course, it can get your order right every single time. So though the entire setup is automated and doesn't require any human interaction, Cafe X, like many automated solution companies, have received quite a bit of criticism for essentially stealing jobs that humans can still do. However, Cafe X also has a coffee specialist on site at every single location to both discuss the coffee options and aid customers with the process if they so need it. However, if you're a little bit more picky with your coffee and appreciate some latte art, this option might not be for you, as a robot just isn't there yet with any sort of artistic talent. So there's actually also an upgraded station that is planned to be rolled out later on. And this will include a collaborative mode where a human staff worker can start an order and tell the robot to then finish it. However, when not in collaborative mode, this new robot can actually make 3 coffee orders in just 40 seconds. So finally, I visited Silicon Valley last year to speak at a conference on robots in industry, and during the weekend, I had the chance to visit San Francisco for the very first time. So one of the many things that I did was go and eat at a place called Itza, and it is a small, fully automated restaurant that has the same premise as Cafe X. Though instead of coffee, they have entire meals. So 0 human interaction was necessary. All you had to do was simply order and wait for your food to be ready and put in one of the many boxes on the store walls that would be digitally labeled with your name. So the healthy quinoa-based meal that the restaurant chain specializes in was actually pretty decent for being prepared by robots. So though a number of the stores actually have closed in the past year due to some hasty overexpanding, the company has now pivoted to supporting other restaurant companies to incorporate its technology. So I think it's fair to assume that we can see many more of these fully automated restaurants coming out in the years to come. But here I think it's interesting to stop and see an interesting situation that comes up specifically related to the automation of restaurants. So a few years ago, I had a short, though quite intense debate with a friend who was against the idea entirely, namely on the grounds that he prefers to interact with the restaurant staff and have that human interaction as part of the eating out experience. So though I tend to agree with him actually, and see that this could act as a limiting factor for the growth of automation in the sector, I really think that this is an argument that is presented against most new technologies in general. And this is specifically the old way of doing things is really comfortable to the generation that grew up with that way. And there is a perceived loss in the modification of that activity. However, newer generations that are exposed to the new technology don't have this same issue. So thus, if automated restaurants, cafes, and burger bars are to become a little bit more common, the argument that the human interaction between customer and staff is crucial to a dining experience might not even be considered in a few short years by younger people. But what about you? Would you be comfortable going to a restaurant and simply ordering your food from a kiosk screen and having it delivered by a robot like in some sci-fi movies? Or are you completely for the necessary or crucial human interaction between customer and staff, as we have in most restaurants today? So that's it for this week. Please be sure to review the podcast if you haven't done so already, as it really does help others to find out about it. And next week, we'll look at automation within the military.
The Automated Podcast.